Hello and welcome to the Progress Theory, where we discuss scientific principles for optimizing human performance. My name is Dr. Phil Price, and on today's episode, we're joined by plyometric expert Matt McInnes-Watson. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but you quite often hear of a new world record being broken in a number of different sports, say weightlifting, or quite often in running. I'm always hearing of a new world record in, say, 5K, 10K, etc., etc. But you rarely hear of a world record being broken in a jump event, such as the long jump or triple jump or high jump. I mean, Jonathan Edwards' world record in the triple jump has been going since 1995. So what needs to happen in the jump training and the culture within jump training to see an improvement in jump sports? That's why I contacted Matt. And if you have any interest in improving jump performance, this episode is for you. As always, follow the Progress Theory on Instagram and YouTube and check out all of our other episodes. Here is Matt McInnes-Watson. Matt, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
No, I've been looking forward to this one for quite some time because I followed you online for quite a while. And I have to admit, there seems to be like a real plyometrics resurgence almost. You know how in S&C you got particular topics or particular sports get popular and they, not that they go out of fashion, but everyone's kind of talking about them on social media. And I think what's cool about the plyometrics one is that it got really popular. I think you're a really big driving force because of that, but it stayed popular. I think just people have really understood the importance of plyometrics, whether you're training for, I don't know, sport or just general health. So I think it's really cool. And your content that you put out is really amazing and, you know, has the perfect blend of information plus entertaining. So it's great to have you on.
I appreciate it. It's, I think it's a larger goal for me to not necessarily like educate, but to, I guess, motivate people to be passionate about it and to see it as valuable as like strength training. Because everyone's forever found that strength training has a large piece of like the training pie, but plyometrics has kind of gone in and out. It's faded in, faded out. So hopefully it's here for the long term. And it's really, I want to see it as part of speed training. I want to see it as part of, I guess change of direction and agility also has that. It's like everyone's like, oh, it's really valuable, and now it's gone quiet again. And I guess it's that the ebb and flow of simplicity in training and then like complexity in training. I think that there's also that ebb and flow of like keep it really simple. It's all about output, and then it's like, and it flips on its head, and then it all becomes about motor learning. And yeah, we go through these ebbs and flows, and where someone brings out a big book, and then everyone goes crazy on it. So hopefully plyometrics is here to stay for a little longer than it has in the past and stuff.
Yeah, certainly. Like I guess because speed did get popular, didn't it? Probably like a year or two ago, everyone was talking about speed and sprint training, which is great. And then it's got less popular, but it shouldn't have. I think people have just thought, okay, we've talked about this now. What else can we talk about? And you know, trying to new things come into popularity, don't they? I understand the importance of speed and particularly plyometrics because I remember this was years ago. I was doing like an obstacle course race, and it was one of those where it has a really large sort of ramp you've got to run up at the end, a bit like a Ninja Warrior type thing. And I'd finished playing rugby after 4 knee surgeries, and I was just kind of looking around and watching people sprint towards this ramp. And it was such an apparent thing. It's like one of the first things that goes, it seems, is kind of like people's reactive ability and speed, because people just look like they're running through mud trying to get up the slide or ramp, whatever. And the crazy thing for me, I just thought, is like, it's not necessarily that as you get older, you see like a massive decline in like reactive strength, reactive ability. It's just that people just, as soon as they're playing sport, they're running, there is some kind of plyometric quality with that. But as soon as they stop, they don't train it at all. So they lose it if they're doing any type of training. So it was just really cool to see that your stuff's got really popular and hopefully here to stay, but certainly from a health perspective, because, you look at the general public, it's quite often the thing that deteriorates quite quickly.
I think it's going to be profound in the next decade, I would say. I would say so with regards to like health longevity. We have a massive surge in that at the moment. The world of podcasting has really boosted that, I think. And this idea of really staying youthful for as long as we can, I think, is becoming just really popular. And I think plyometrics or reactive strength, a level of dynamic capacity has a really big place in health longevity because of what we lose and then what that then impacts further down the line with regards to falls in the elder population or ruptures in major tendons that typically then just drive this heavy decline of mobility of an individual, I think. So if someone, let's say, ruptures their Achilles at the age of 50, the likelihood that their physical activity declines dramatically is really high, I think. So, what does it take to maintain a level of tissue capacity, of just that reactive element with the brain being able to fire at a fast enough rate for us to understand what we need to do with our body. And I guess also on the flip side of things, having the reflexive ability to also catch ourselves in elder populations when we look to fall, because that's a $1 billion industry there, is like the hip and pelvis fractures with elder populations or old age pensioners, as we say in the UK. It's all about reflexes. It's about understanding how to catch yourself. Or on the flip side of it, if you're looking more towards performance, it's being reflexively capable to produce force in a fast time period. And when you don't train it, we go back to that rupture of a tendon, which leads to that immobility and likelihood of then, the taxpayer taking the brunt in the UK, especially, of having to then facilitate this health bill because we didn't do something as basic as just jumping around a bit for the whole entirety of our life. But hopefully the silly training methods like plyometrics, in terms of how they visually look, if you saw someone in a recreational park doing plyometrics, it looks kind of strange if you've got a 50 or 60-year-old doing it. To me, it's amazing to see, but I don't think we're quite there. So maybe in a gym setting, it is more acceptable, but I think that there has to be a big push for. We have the hypertrophy in health longevity there. It's a big, important thing. And I think it does facilitate supporting the reactive, reflexive side of things when it comes to health longevity. But I think I saw someone post a clip of Peter Attia, who's a big longevity guy, whether you like him or not, but he mentioned the importance of maintaining a level of hypertrophy in fast twitch fibers, which again is not necessarily always about the strength component, but it's about maintaining, speed within the body. So if you don't use it, then you definitely lose it. If we go back to this very slow strength, you're just going out and running endurance stuff. Is that going to help facilitate that reflexive ability in us? Probably not. So you're going to need to keep the dynamic side in there. So yeah, if I'm there to help push this agenda, then I'm all for it.
I know before we started recording, you talked about a gap in the area of research, particularly with plyometrics. Is that what got you into plyometrics initially, or was it from like a coaching perspective, or from maybe as an athlete?
So I was a high jumper, and I fell upon a coach that has been using plyometrics in the way that I do now since the early 70s. It's kind of all thrust. I've never even heard of plyometrics until I became a high jumper. Like, I didn't even come into the stratosphere of my existence, really, understanding what it means to land and take off and what that does for us biologically. It was a case of Eric Little, my coach, really just driving that into my head. Not necessarily him driving, but like in terms of how I saw movement then and how that interested me with regards to watching sport, understanding movement, and really where we can go with something as powerful as a quality plyometric program. I think it just shaped really how I then kind of moved forward into coaching and then looking at research after that. I think I'd always been given pieces of research from Eric. So Eric's, still is my mentor to this day. We met around 15, 16 years ago. Yeah, he's always kind of given me research. A lot of the time it's been, we've always laughed about the quality of what's being researched. Because fundamentally, I think that we lack a clarity of what a plyometric is. I say this all the time, but we still don't have a standard within research where I know exactly what's actually happening in the testing and in the intervention. Like I think research needs to go in a direction where we get a video of what those movements look like. Like I want to see exactly what it looks like, not just freeze frames of an image, because sometimes that also doesn't give us complete clarity, especially when you're dealing with, unless you're using a high-speed camera and we have 30 images of what that looks like in every single frame of movement, because it really matters. It really matters with regards to what we are going to get adaptationally and how that's going to impact what's going to come with the results. That was at the forefront of what I was looking at really with my PhD, and I did a really pretty extensive meta-analysis. I looked at 1,400 plyometric papers, and almost half of them didn't use plyometrics in a typical stance of what a plyometric is. If you were to look at how Berkoshansky regards plyometrics, who, funnily enough, kind of created it as a training method. So I think that's pretty important to look at. So, and it's really just driven me to be very critical in terms of how I look at every piece of research. So it doesn't matter if it's strength work, it doesn't matter if it's to do with endurance, to do with tendon research, because you just have to look at actually what is being tested, what are the interventions, and how we're truly getting these results out of things that have maybe large claims and so on.
It's interesting what you're saying about the figures in research. It just made me start thinking about, instead of having a figure where you've got multiple stills of the person moving through the movement, figures are getting replaced by YouTube videos to actually describe, kind of give that image of what's happening. Things are moving online more, so why could that not happen? And then the PDF will say, please refer to this YouTube video.
Yeah, I can be a little skeptical here and say that I'm not sure that the journals would be happy, because they know that the quality of research would also have to dramatically increase and improve. So does that make it a little harder from a journal's perspective? Maybe it does, but I think the end user ultimately is the one that benefits from that the most. It's one or the other. Or we go to old school kinograms. So I just want to see one large image, and I want to see every single frame of that person in that image. And it's just taken from the video, and you can create that with probably a piece of AI now that probably takes 10 seconds. So that also could be a way for us to see that. It's just to have those freeze frames in one image, see exactly what it looks like. Because, you go as crude as to, you're looking at a squatting study, the depth of let's say a back squat. How do I know what kind of depth it was to? It could have been to a quarter squat. It could have been to a parallel squat. It could have been to a deep squat. Even if it says a deep squat, was it a truly deep squat? We don't know unless I think that we actually see the video footage of it. I think that that's the direction that it's got to move for us to continue to feel confident in research as well.
With the definitions of plyometric, from that meta-analysis you talked about, is that study still using more dynamic movements such as jumping and classifying as plyometric, and that's where a lot of the confusion comes from?
Yeah. It's more ballistic movement. You may see just takeoff based movements in there. People were using a lot of box jumping methods, or they were using just falling off of platforms and landing, or they're using really kind of just very rudimentary forms of movement like jump rope. So I would see the abstract and see, it was plyometrics we used to look at improving X, Y, and Z, and then go into it. And it's like the first method was to jump rope. And it's like, okay, cool. That could be a relatively plyometric action, but along the spectrum of plyometrics, how dynamic truly is jumping a skipping rope? And again, so the level and clarity of a system of plyometrics has to be really taught within the industry for us we need to just decide what's going on. We have like really intense forms of movement, we have submaximal forms of movement, we have rudimentary forms of movement. What does each level of this spectrum of plyometrics, what does it provide us with regards to adaptations? Are the submaximal movements feeding towards more tissue adaptations? Are the intense forms supportive of more elastic or reactive qualities? We need to understand where that is, because again, it's like saying plyometrics had an impact on speed. And it's also like saying using a squatting pattern had an impact on speed. And you're like, but what level of squatting did we use? Was it 1 RM or was it 10 RM? Because that again is the level of clarity that you get sometimes in research. So it could be really rudimentary. It could be completely intense. It could be almost supramaximal stuff. You could be falling off enormous platforms, but to tarnish it all with one plyometric brush is sometimes hard to really decipher and be able to actually take that research anywhere but just reading the PDF.
Is that why in your own plyometric programming, you program a variety of different styles of, say, jumps, plyometrics, et cetera, because you are focusing on different adaptations in terms of it might be more tissue based, it might be more neuromuscular reflective, et cetera, because I know you did a podcast recently where you highlighted the importance of your deep tier plyometric training and how that feeds into the other forms of plyometric exercises that you do. Are these kind of questions that you have within the literature some of the ideas which then formulated your own style of programming, obviously on top of everything that you've learned that with Eric and your own training?
That system has really been part of what I did as an athlete. I think that I have been maybe a little more stringent in having like quite a strict system to it. And I think that just helps to educate people in a larger format, rather than just in like a close, intimate setting where it's just you, your coach, and 5 other athletes, and you kind of speak the same language. But trying to bucket it a little bit with regards to where levels of intensity and volume work for those different types of plyos has, maybe it's got a little bit more stringent, because they're just help. I think it helps deliver the message a bit better, but ultimately it is all to do with that. When I was a high jumper, we would have done a certain form of those plyos. So if it was lighter or rudimentary forms of movement, we were using it for a very apparent reason. We understood that when we built up to a certain volume of it, it helped support other things within our training. So if it was rudimentary forms of plyometrics, it was going to support our lower legs capacity to then be able to do a little bit more higher intensity work, or we were just building more capacity to actually just do more volume. It had to start somewhere. It had to start very rudimentary and then gradually increase over time. It always has had that really initial focus, and it continues to have that, and it continues to actually, whether it gives me anecdotal evidence or whatever you want to class it as, but I continually am fed that sort of evidence and information as to why we'd be using certain forms. And I think the biggest distinction recently over the last few years has been the deep tier landings and how I've learned a lot about that with regards to Olympic lifters. That's been really quite standout, and looking at like forms of movement, whether you're classing a movement as an overcoming movement as opposed to a yielding movement, and how we can use velocity as a form of overload, even in deeper ranges of movement. Like I've always used deep tier landings or deeper range landing and takeoff based actions, but I think now getting into the Olympic lifting area has helped me understand how much more value that brings now to us with regards to being able to yield force as opposed to constantly fighting force. And it really is providing just a greater capacity for someone like an Olympic lifter to feel more comfort in force in deeper ranges. To answer your question, it is, I think it constantly is growing, but we do have real kind of focal points as to why we would use each tier. It has a lot of power in it, I think, as a coach to have, this is why we're using this is why we're using this, not just kind of floating loads of ideas out there, which often is the case when it comes to dynamic movement.
Yeah. Very clear as to what you believe this is working rather than, right, let's try all these different exercises because we think that it does this, and then there's a lack of structure to it. Quite often they provide prerequisites if they, that's why you structure training in a certain way. Regarding performance, especially at the high end, I've noticed when looking at world records that this may be some bias towards social media and what you see. You quite often hear about new PBs, new world records being broken quite a lot in certain events. Whereas in the triple jump, for example, we've got Jonathan Edwards. I mean, his record has stood for a very, very long time. World records in the jumps don't seem to be as regular in other sports. And that might be just from what I've seen, and maybe I might have perceived that as wrong. I wonder if you've noticed the same, and I wanted to ask a plyo expert regarding this. Why do you think that could be the reason? Is it a training thing, or is it just a genetic thing? What could be one of the reasons why we don't see as many world records being broken in those particular jumping events, say at the Olympics?
There definitely has been I think the weight training world has been really thrusted upon the track and field community within the last 20 years. And I wonder if that has had an influence at large, because S&C has kind of continually grown, and being here in the US, it is very prominent. There is just maybe a larger influence and reasoning behind why we constantly have strength work in training for a track athlete. That could be something there. I think that there was we had, especially in the high jump, we had an era of jumpers that really transcended anything that we do have a good group of jumpers now, but if you look at the early 90s, late 80s, we had a considerable amount of athletes that had jumped 240. And there was just a solid group of guys that were constantly pushing that boundary. And I think if you look at where Fosbury broke the world record, if you look at how often things were broken, there's a bit more of a culture where things are constantly broken. It continues to develop as an event. But I think that we got to a stage where things just stagnated for a period, and now it's really hard to break past that stagnation because we continue to train in the same way when we have a very different generation of people. If you high jumped in the early 90s, that suggests that you probably grew up in the early 70s. So the way of life may have been very different. The type of specialization of sport may have been very different. You may have played a lot more variety of different sports, where now there might be more of a hyper focus on specific events. And I also just think that potentially the popularity of track and field also has decreased. I always remember my mentor Eric saying to me when I was an athlete, he said that he thought that you could walk into every single high school in America and find a 7-foot high jumper. And it wouldn't be it wouldn't take much for you to produce, to coach someone to being able to jump around 215, which is a significant barrier. That's always kind of intrigued me. And I've always looked at it and said, why isn't that the case that we've got that many jumpers? I think, coaches and the accessibility to a quality level of coaching is definitely there. But I think that they're just being dragged into other sports that have a lot of money. And we're losing a lot of quality jumpers to that for sure. And with regards to the training, I think that, we got to this stage in the early 2000s and moved into 2010 sort of era. I think dynamic training went into a bit of a wishy-washy period. Yeah, we've lost a little bit with regards to that American formula for success. And I think you see it when, I watched the Watts Gravity event, which was Barshim's high jump event in Qatar. And they had a load of Europeans. They had, obviously, Barshim was there, the Qatari, and then they had an American. And you could just see the difference. There's an aesthetic flow to how Europeans jump. And it's similar to kind of the Qatari boy, but he is coached. He was originally coached by a European guy. So then you see the American, and it's just incredibly strong, just has a great natural ability, but actually how he's doing things when he jumps, maybe it's because he's not spending so much time on the specifics of actual jumping plyometrics in comparison to what maybe the Europeans are doing. They're working a lot more on quality of movement as opposed to, and someone might absolutely butcher me for saying that, but it looks like that as an outsider. An outsider's perspective, it massively looks like that. And you do often get it. And then because of that, you get a real large inconsistency from American high jumpers. It's different in the triple jump. I think you can get away with it a little bit more. But yeah, we've just lacked that period of really pushing everything forward. And I think that there was a bigger focus on the quality of speed work in the track and field community as well, back in the 90s in comparison to now. I might be wrong, but hey, if there's just some opinions on it.
That was a wicked answer. I mean, I threw a lot there with that question, and I knew it was a very multifactorial and almost had to hold myself back as to, could it be this or this or this? So to come back with really well-rounded ideas of all the different areas which could influence it, from physical to cultural, that was a wicked answer. I mean, I could definitely sympathize regarding the more focus on strength over the last, I don't know, maybe say 20 years. I mean, I remember being at a conference and they talked about the training of sprinter Christophe Lemaitre, and how I think over a 4-year cycle, their aim was to get max strength up, so increase the ceiling, and then increase sort of more dynamic stuff once the athlete was stronger. But the athlete ran a sub 10, and I don't think, maybe I'm butchering this, but I don't think ever got under 10 again, despite their hypothesis of what their training was trying to achieve. And maybe there was just this pure focus on more max strength, which ended up taking away the speed component of the athlete, and he never quite got it back in the time frame that he had. And even in the UKSCA, I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it seemed like it was very biased towards weightlifting. Again, that's very opinionated of me, but as a cultural shift, I think we're moving away from biasing strength, and maybe, like you said, in the next few years, when certain things are getting popular, and that's going to change how the way people think and train, and maybe what is old is new, and what we were doing back in the late 80s, early 90s is going to come back around, and we're going to see another renaissance of performance. Obviously, there's a variety of different issues which can add to that, but yeah, when you describe all those factors, you can start to see why my perception of why there hasn't been as many records broken in the jumping events, and why that's happened. So yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm kind of throwing things out there, but just making sense of it all.
No. Yeah, I mean, a big thing for me was in around 2010, I was still high jumping, and I went out to a weather training camp in Portugal. We would train on the track, and then we'd go into the weight room. And the weight room looked so different to any weight room that I'd ever been in. There were so many pieces of equipment that were so specialized. It was all specialized strength in it. There were certain things that would help. I mean, you see them now, like the hydraulic that works on like the kickback strength of a sprinter. There were things like that were just based with free weights in there. There were all these weird and wonderful things that the track and field community have just created and gone, yeah, this looks quite specific to what we're doing. And it gets a lot of hate. It's like, you should just do strength to get stronger. And this stuff was definitely from the early 90s, because it was a spit and sawdust sort of environment. It was as grimy as could be, but there were a lot of specific strength training things in there. And I think we do start to see a resurgence in a couple of those training methods, because we look at how many times do you see the Werner Gunther shot put video of him, 6'7", probably weighs, 250 pounds, and he's doing just some classical special strength, kind of old school Verkhoshansky kind of methods. And that, to me, I think maybe lacks now. We fall in love a little bit with trying to maybe teach someone how to squat or how to clean. And there is, of course, there's merit in it, but maybe this is the thing that we lack a little bit. We lack that special strength quality, and we separate elements too much. I feel like they were always trying to impact the high jump when they were even training in the gym. Some people don't like that. They like to focus on the strength and do the strength stuff, and then you go away and you do the high jump work. But it took the high jump coach or the triple jump coach, they took their athletes into the weight room and they did that. They did their form of training rather than also having silos of saying, I'm the high jump coach and now I give the high jumper to you as the strength coach. I don't know. Maybe there's something in that too. There potentially could be.
Mm. So what do you think needs to change I mean, you've highlighted some areas that could potentially change, but if you were, I don't know, omnipotent, overseeing all this cultural shift and what training they should do, what kind of changes would you make, would you think we're going to have the best impact on the sport of the jumping events in track and field?
Now you're really coming at me with a great question. So we need to get away from being so intimidated, because again, I think that there was a shift when the S&C community told us that plyometrics should be done after a certain age or when you've gained a certain amount of strength. And I think that the track and field guys that have been doing it for 20 years had been coaching plyometrics and then go, oh, have I been doing this wrong? And they question it. And you're like, no, you were doing it fine. Your people weren't getting injured. They were developing really well. And was it a case that actually, who cares whether it was plyometric or not, or it was just special strength movements that were facilitating how to improve an event? You wouldn't tell a basketball coach to not do a certain movement on a court because it potentially would be do you know what I mean? It would be potentially damaging because they weren't strong enough to do that. And they're like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years and the kids have been just fine. And actually, if I took that away, they'd probably lose a lot of these qualities to initiate some of these skills. I wonder if that has a large impact on us as a community. And I say us because I know I still coach jumps to this day, but actually the scarcity around using real ballistic and reactive dynamic elements of training and keeping it there from a young age, and actually seeing, again, we do also get impacted by the American collegiate system in that they really have to have everything in line by the time they're 18 so that they can get the opportunity to win college scholarships. And to me, I've never felt the need to push someone to the extent of giving them every single card possible with the training within regards to a training method and saying, oh, we've got to stack everything on top so that you can be, at a world-class level at 18. No, actually, let's slow things down. And I might give you strength training when you're 18 or 19, because actually we've got so much to work on with regards to the skill capacity side of things. Or actually, we might bring in a certain form of training at an older age and actually lengthen out this long-term development rather than trying to compact it down into a 2-3 year period just because they've got through the max height velocity and puberty kind of ages. Just because we see a man that's now come out of being 16, 17, and you're like, well, you're a different guy now, doesn't mean that you now have the ability to just chuck more things at them. Actually, I think that if I can drip feed something to an athlete and they still improve over time, that serves a much greater extent to someone that wants longevity in a career. And everything's trying to be done at the earliest ages. No one really cares about a 15-year-old world champion. They care about, an adult world champion. That's ultimately where we want to be at. So yeah, it's kind of a case that there's some scarcity still there. And we don't focus on what a 25-year-old world-class athlete would look like. We concentrate too much on what an 18-year-old world-class athlete could potentially be, when the reality is very, very low.
They seem to, especially with Talent ID, they seem to really want to hit certain thresholds, and almost to the point where those thresholds are way too early for the athlete because they're competing for resources, I guess. So they put the thresholds really high so they can see what the next big thing is. And it's someone that's aggressively got there, but long term, it might be pretty crappy for them. Yeah, I mean, like you probably argue that for every sport, but surely for something so impactful like a reactive sport like triple jump or anything like that, there must be really detrimental long term for them, because you've just kind of like forced something on someone that might not necessarily be ready. And many years of practicing the skill probably could have given them the qualities to get to a good stage at that point. Yes,
Yeah.
I can definitely see.
Yeah.
I can definitely see that. Which event do you see the most potential for, a big world record break at some point? So if we think about long jump, triple jump, and the high jump, which of those events do you think there's going to be a bit of may even lead the resurgence, because there hasn't been much improvement in that domain for the last few years, and the potential is there if they get it right?
Mm. The women's triple jump is definitely in a big resurgence period, and I would like to see the same in women's high jump, but I don't think it is there. But the women's triple jump, there looks to be a really large focus on the value of speed in the event. We've always had real fast male triple jumpers, and they've been fast, but they've never been long jump fast. And I'd like to see that now come in. But it's always been tough to try and convince a 10 flat long jumper to, what about triple jump? Consider that. It tends to be the slower guys. Maybe you run 10.5, you've got the speed of running 10.5, would go to the triple jump. When actually I'd like to see the speed demons actually go to the triple jump as well. Because there's just so much value in being able to carry velocity like that. But the women's triple jump, I think they're learning how to use traveling velocity very well now. And I think that's starting to show. And because of that, I'd like to then see how that might push the men's side as well. I think Christian Taylor did a phenomenal job of doing that in 2012 to 2018. He really took it to the event in saying, actually, speed has to be a fundamental part of the triple jump. Where I got really excited about the high jump was the Canadian Derek Drouin started to really push the boundaries of the high jump takeoff. Unfortunately, he really, really struggled with injury, and it could be because of the way that he started to jump. But I'd kind of thought it in the past, but seeing an athlete jump or stick their foot into a plant on their forefoot and not have a full foot at takeoff was really, really interesting. And it showed me that, again, velocity becomes really the fundamental part of, physics tells us that if you want to jump high, you've got to carry a lot of horizontal momentum. And when you're doing it off one leg, it's even more important. So Derek Drouin pushed the boundaries of that. And he showed that in Rio. I mean, really, I thought that he could potentially have gone to jump 250, potentially. It became a lot more about speed. And I think we are starting to veer towards that now. The high jump is becoming a lot less about the power jumper, and it's becoming more about the speed jumper. You see very few power-based jumpers. And what I mean by power-based jumpers is they have a swinging free leg rather than one that's kind of really highly picked up. And it does impact the ground contact times. And I think it serves better for injuries. I think you potentially see quite a few more injuries in the power jumping high jumpers. But in the early 2000s, the event, even to the 90s, I think that we still had a big community of power jumpers. Sotomayor, the world record holder, was a lot more of a power jumper than he was a speed jumper, although carried a lot of speed. But in terms of the time that he spent on the ground, paid dividends for the amount of injuries that he also had. Had a lot of ankle surgeries because of that. And again, could the event have gone on a step further if he hadn't had those injuries is also a good question. So speed, I think, is going to become the fundamental component of it. And to achieve that, well, we need to be able to deal with extremely high impulses in extremely short amounts of time. So yeah, in comes plyometrics and understanding how to program that to the nth degree. It is what's going to be solving these problems. So yeah, I mean, I love to see, in terms of, I'm a high jumper, it's my favorite event because of that. But seeing someone like Barshim, seeing Jean-Marc Tamberi, these guys are running fast. They are carrying a lot of speed, and they get off the ground in almost long jumping takeoff times, which is phenomenal, really, to convert horizontal momentum vertically like that. And to do it in such a short period of time is just amazing. So what does it take to achieve that and some? Yeah, it's maybe I'm not the right person to answer the question, but that's how I see it. I see speed being the profound thing.
Cool. And is it a lot of training now going to have to focus on entrance speed, but also the skill of performing the movement with a higher entrance speed? And can you coach the difference between being a power athlete and a speed athlete? I'm assuming that the power athlete, if they got a swinging leg, it's almost like a very short counter movement, so they spend more time on the ground. Am I right with that, or have I got that completely wrong?
Well, so you just have a longer eccentric and isometric phase, because what tends to be a thing is that you have more of a pulling action with regards to the plant leg, and then that, let's say that you're a left foot takeoff, that right leg would tend to be a lot more behind it, so you get that pulling down on that front left leg, and then the right leg also gets that switching action. You'll have, like, at touchdown, your knees will be a lot more separate, and that back leg, that free leg, will be a lot further behind you, so you get that longer pull. Whereas a speed jumper, your knees will kind of be together. That your free leg's traveling through so fast that it becomes almost more of a blocking action. And you're gonna use the analogy of kind of like sticking a pole into the ground, and that takeoff leg tends to be a lot more rigid. So when you've got a power jumper, the likelihood for you to maintain stiffness through that whole leg is a lot lower than it is in a speed jumper, because you have more chance to flex and deform at those joints because you're spending more time under tension like that.
Yeah.
So if you're enormously strong and event specifically strong, you can keep that stiffness there and you can ride through it and use it. But the likelihood doing that is really tough. So the precision of things is going to be a big component of it. And ultimately, you bring more speed in, you've got to execute it at a higher speed, which is enormous in terms of the skill acquisition of being able to do that. But also, I think there's a lot to be learned from plyometrics with regards to that, because you can start to understand better proprioceptively, and you can learn how to anticipate the ground better with more and more intense forms of plyometrics. That ultimately the event has to teach a lot. But yeah, I just see the understanding the dynamics of very fast eccentric loading is really where you learn a lot. The best thing to test this on, we used to do a thing called slingshot takeoffs. So I'd put a band around an athlete, and I'd have a couple of them strapped together, so we'd have a long pull on it. And I would start to pull, and then you maybe have 5 strides and you're slung into that takeoff. And then you can understand just how quickly your brain has to work. In comparison, if I was to just carry the same velocity and run and then take off, you'd be like, oh, okay, my brain's ready for this. When you do a slingshot and something else creates that, your brain has to work at overspeed. So if you've ever been a jumper, and there's a day where you're like, I just can't wrap my head around where I need to put my foot, my brain just can't compute at this speed, that's a big element that needs to be taught. You're notching it up 1% and it can feel like you're running 100 miles an hour faster. It takes a lot of brain power to understand that. And it also then takes reflexive power, in terms of that has to be done. It can't even go to the brain, it's moving at that speed. So you have to do all the conscious learning to be able to do things subconsciously, because it's so fast, it can only reflexively go to the spinal cord and come back down to the foot. It can't go to the brain because it's so fast. So yeah, when you're dealing with takeoffs that are 0.12, I think that you just don't have the time to do that.
Going back to your plyo program, and say teaching plyometrics to the masses, in terms of the overspeed training, is that something that you try to lead your program to? So, for example, for a lot of people, that intensity would be too much, especially initially. Is that something you still try and train people towards, because you feel the quality from that will be very important to, sub-elite athletes in whatever sport they may have? Or is it something that maybe is specifically reserved for the elite jumpers because of the intensity of the action?
I think I have a view on kind of all training methods that I use for anyone and everyone, right? And it is, if you were to look at what we could get if we were able to go somewhere pretty special with an individual, sometimes you'll never get there, but ultimately it is to super maximally load someone in a way that is, it far exceeds what they're able to do in day-to-day life, right? So, or day-to-day within their event or their sport or whatever training they're trying to do. So it is definitely the opinion. So I'd love to be able to have that focus with someone and say, we hope to super maximally load the eccentric component of some big takeoffs or some big plyometrics that you're trying to do. And ultimately, that is the goal of plyometrics. It is to expose you to something where your body goes, well, we have to adapt here. In order for me to deal with this crazy initial fall, I've got to time things better. Your brain has to work faster. I have to be reflexive, because if I sit in the bottom of this hole, it's going to either lead to catastrophic injury, or it's going to make me feel a lot worse tomorrow, or it's going to strain the tendon in a way that it just feels awful the next day. Subconsciously, your mind's going to be figuring out all these things. How do I stiffen faster? How do I use the energy rather than bleed all the energy? We really go there all the time with plyometrics. And I think people look too much towards training dynamic movement and plyometrics in too much of a basic strength view. It is always, how often do you ever push past your 1RM, or what you can maximally? There's a little bit of work that might be done on attenuating some sort of eccentric force. Let's say that you've got someone to help you with lifting plates off as you go through the concentric phase, or let's say that someone is pushing you down into like an isolated movement. It's very often that we push the overload with regards to volume rather than it is actually, we just kind of meet ourselves as to, oh, this is what we can do, so this is what we push. When actually plyometrics is, I think, is always a little bit past the potential of what we can handle, and that's where we want it to go anyway. So we prepare the body to go past that all the time. And we use movements that might open our eyes to something and go, whoa, we haven't done that before. And I get that. I get that all the time with people being like, whenever I do that, like I'm getting to a stage now where I'm doing these, let's say, bounds for distance, and I'm just not ready for it. And it's like, well, it's because we've built those capacities to now push you past those, that 1RM version of a bound for distance. And now you're super maximally doing something. So your brain now, we have to have this constant ebb and flow of building a physical capacity and then focusing actually on the brain power and actually executing it as a skill. And then we go back to, well, we've now done this and now I can execute it because I've got the strength and I've got the brain power, where now I can push the physical capacity again. So we constantly move, we ebb and flow between those two things. And ultimately, it's the driver is always, how are we pushing that? How are we going somewhere that we haven't necessarily been before? And what's nice about that is it can happen season to season, or it can happen within a few months period where you're like, whoa, I haven't done hopping in a long time. And you go back to, it's so difficult to execute, maybe because I haven't hopped in 3 months, single leg, right. And it feels like your leg has to whip into the ground at 5 times the speed that you've ever been able to deal with before. And it's just the computing power of the brain. The brain understands that there is no time to think, but to whip the leg into the ground just to keep you moving along. It's not even necessarily that we're trying to achieve height or distance or speed. No, it's just to keep you moving along. That's, again, it's why hopping never leaves the program, and hopping is the best movement that you can do ever in any form of training, in my opinion, because you have no choice. You have no choice. You can't back off. You have nowhere to hide. And it puts you in a scenario where you have to figure things out. You have to do things at speed. And it humbles you every time you take a little period of time off. Let's say back squatting strength. I might not back squat for 2 months. I can go into a gym and I can back squat pretty heavy every single time I do it. Leave 2 months off, do a little session. Cool, I'm still pretty strong. You can take 2 weeks off of hopping and you're like, what happened? Like someone has just pulled the plug on me overnight and I just don't have that power to do that. So it's something I think that should be at the forefront of everything with dynamic movement. It is to chase the potential for greater levels of dynamic capacity in everything that you coach. Doesn't matter if it's with an 80-year-old. If we could get to a level that is really, you're like, whoa, that's an 80-year-old. Like I put up a video of a 63-year-old woman hopping a few weeks ago. If she can go further than that and really push the boundaries of that, that's ultimately what I would be trying to achieve with each thought in terms of training.
It's really awesome to hear that the direction and the aims. Say someone that was getting into plyometrics because they really understood the importance of it. What would your recommendations be for that person?
You have to build the movement patterns. You have to start bilaterally. You have to move to a split stance. You can then progress things into a split exchanging, bilateral movement, and then you can go to bounding, and then you can go to hopping. However long that takes is based on what you've done before, where you're at now, age, stage, whatever. But you can ultimately start very rudimentarily and look at where it could potentially go. Just use flat ground. You don't have to use boxes. You don't have to use any form of external stimulus. Your external stimulus is gravity and how your body is being slungshot into the floor. That ultimately is the aim of everything. It's like the floor is the punching bag and you are in the air, and however you want to deliver that punch into the ground is what's then going to put you back into the air. That's how you have to look at it. So if I want to just do baby punches, because I'm starting my Bruce Lee training of the little 1-inch punch into a piece of wood. Okay, cool. That's my rudimentary plyometric to start with. I'm not going to be throwing haymakers into a piece of wood to start with. It's going to take a lot of time. So in order for me to feel comfortable, I start very easy. Doesn't matter if you're taking off an inch into the air. It is a starting point for you to gradually build up and saying, in 3 months' time, this is going to be 3 or 4 inches higher. And that is what's going to give me the constant exposure to higher overloads. It's self-regulating. The better I get at this movement, the higher I jump, the higher the landing forces, the better I get at the movement. And it is constant revolving door. So it's more overload, better skills, better adaptation, and you constantly develop that. So I think that's where you've got to go. Start rudimentary, go through the movement patterns. Once you can do that, notch it up 10%. See how those movement patterns develop. If you cannot do, let's say, hopping at the next level, that's fine. Keep it at the basic level. And when you gradually start to see that it's getting better with regards to the skill, you're thinking, wow, I can do so much more volume of this. Then you take it up a notch. And it gradually just does this and compiles into bigger and greater things.
That's absolutely class. Where can people access your plyometric programming?
You can go to plusplyos.com, and we have a subscription program, and it has a program on there from the most basic level, like my 63-year-old mum can do them, and world-class athletes can do them. It genuinely has every step that you could possibly need. It has like 6 or 7 different sports. It has 2-day splits, 3-day splits, or 4-day splits, depending on your situation. And in season, off season, yeah, honestly, it's just a gold mine for all these different plyometric programs. It's all in an app, and yeah, you can get it there. If there's anything that you're ever intrigued by with regards to plyometrics, you have to start doing it to understand it. To really understand the coaching of it, to really understand the adaptations, to understand how much things will change in a 3 or 4 month period of doing it consistently, then you start to learn. And it makes so much more sense. So yeah, plusplyos.com. And if you've got any questions, you can always speak to me online, on Instagram, just McInnes-Watson, on Twitter. Sometimes I'm on there, but Instagram is normally the place to speak to me about this sort of stuff.
No, brilliant. No, I can't recommend, getting your hands dirty. The best way to learn is to experience it yourself and use that feedback to truly understand what the body is capable of and how you can progress. Training is your canvas. Use it to try and learn as much as you can. And, no better training style than plyometrics to really humble you into that. So, Matt, thank you so much for coming on to the Progress Theory. And I recommend everyone check out his social media content because you will learn a lot, and check out Plus Plyos as well. And we'll have all that information in the show notes as well. But Matt, thank you so much. And like I said at the beginning, I wanted to have a round 2. So if you're up for it in the future, please, I will give you a shout.
Absolutely. Thanks ever so much for having me on. It's it's always a pleasure to talk shop and some really good questions actually. It got my brain really starting to move, and it's I'm probably gonna think about a few of those questions again over the next couple of days, and I'll come back to you with a bit more detail in terms of where I think that those answers go even further. So appreciate it. Thanks ever so much for having me on.
Cheers, Matt.